So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to So we are back with a brand new movie on What If Harry Potter: An Obsession with Daphne Greengrass. But before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. So let's begin. Harry Potter wondered how exactly he got into this situation. Of all the things that could have possibly happened to him this year, this one is probably the worst. At first, he thought it may be a nice summer. After all, the prophet wasn't lying about him anymore. His godfather's name was finally cleared. He'd become closer with Neville, Ginny, and had become friends with Luna Lovegood. Umbridge was gone, and wouldn't be coming back. Last week, there was a no-confidence vote against Fudge. And most importantly, his godfather had pushed Dumbledore so hard that Harry would never have to return to the Dursleys again. The only thing that could have ruined his mood was the fact he was entirely certain he failed at least 2 of his OWLs. He wasn't even sure if that would have caused his mood to decline. After all, who needs good grades in divination and history of magic anyway? If he were being honest, he would probably admit that not taking either of those classes would probably make the coming school year better. He was contemplating this while he sat in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place when he heard the distinctive tapping of an owl. His dogfather looked up, a look of pensive curiosity on his face, as he took the scroll that the owl held. Harry should have known by the look on Sirius's face that nothing about this summer is going to be easy. 16-year-old Harry Potter and his godfather, a one Mr. Sirius Black, sat in the parlor of Secret Garden, more commonly referred to as Greengrass Manor. Harry sat beside a blonde beauty with large violet eyes. Her name was Daphne Greengrass. She looked just like her mother, Harry thought, gazing at the French witch in front of him. Adeline Abraxia Greengrass, née Delacour, was most certainly in relation to Fleur Delacour. Daphne Greengrass was in his year, a Slytherin, and probably a pureblood. He'd never seen her hang around Malfoy and Pansy's gang of bullies. But he had noticed in second year that she had a following of her own. Blaise Zabini and Theo not followed her around constantly, and he wasn't sure if the girl was even aware that half of the school was half in love with her. He himself had had a bit of a crush on her during third year. He'd been focused more on Cho's silky, inky locks rather than Daphne's air of cold elegance. After the Quidditch World Cup, he realized that at least part of his fascination, and the fascination that seemed to fall across the student body with Daphne Greengrass, was due to the fact that Daphne Greengrass must have been at least partially Vila. "I don't understand," Harry responded after his godfather and Greengrass's parents explained the situation to them. "I'm so sorry, pup," Sirius said with a look of keen distress on his face. "I didn't know that this would affect you." "Why didn't you tell me that this was a possibility?" asked Daphne angrily. Harry stared near blankly. Adeline sighed heavily. "I give up. Sirius, explain this to them while I get some more tea." Greengrass stood up gracefully, and walked in even strides into the next room after handing the thick packet of vellum to the 2 teenagers on the couch. Sirius sighed after she left. "You know I am the last of my family. Outside of me, the black line is extant in my cousins. You know Narcissa, Bellatrix, and Andromeda. A woman cannot hold the title of the patriarch. That's why my mother was never able to fully disown me when I ran away in 5th year. After Azkaban, I cannot have children, and that means you will be the next head of the Black family. The contract stipulates that both partners must be able to conceive, which means I must pass the contract down. There is only one other person who could take over the family, and he cannot be allowed to do so." Daphne narrowed her eyes. "Malfoy," she spat. Harry was surprised by the venom in her voice, but she continued. "Narcissa's son is Draco Malfoy, which means he has the secondary claim after Potter to be the patriarch of the House of Black." "But, I'm not a Black," Harry said. "I'm a Potter." Apollo smiled gently. "That isn't how it works, Mr. Potter." "Just Harry, please, sir," Harry corrected, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, then call me Apollo, Harry. Magic is about intent," Apollo continued patiently, "and you are Sirius's godson. It is more than just words. In the Muggle world, a godparent is usually a mere formality. Here, the acceptance of a godchild and godparent is more binding. It is literally the relationship between a second set of parents and a child." Sirius paced behind Apollo's chair. "If the Malfoy gains control over the House of Black in the event of my death, it would be a disaster. He would gain the wealth, the properties, and he would gain Kreacher. Creature cannot be allowed contact with the Malfoys in any way. Harry shuddered, remembering how Creature had played in a hand in his godfather's near death only 2 weeks prior. Apollo cleared his throat and then faced his daughter, and there are several reasons that you must follow through with this contract, Daphne. Daphne snorted sarcastically, really? And what reasons are those? Aside from the fact that the Malfoys would control the black seats in the government, the contract has been signed, and if it isn't fulfilled, Sirius and Harry will lose their positions. Your grandfather signed a contract to firmly align the Greengrasses with the blacks when you know who began to raise power in the 50s. Daphne's eye twitched. Grandfather has been dead for over 18 years. Yes, Apollo agreed, but he signed that contract for me. Apollo sighed. He signed it to marry me to Andromeda Black. She ran away to get married, and was struck from the tree, and then I married your mother. The contract has no consequences if it isn't fulfilled. It just needs to be passed on to the next available person. That means that the contract was passed down to you. In this case, that's a serious problem because of who would be after you, Harry. But doesn't that mean that she would have married Malfoy? Questioned Harry. Yes, Adeline said as she sat, but Daphne expressed no desire to do so. The only thing to do would be to marry Astoria to Draco. But she has no desire to do that either. And we also have no desire for that. Harry recalled that Daphne did have a sister. She was a rising third year in Ravenclaw and mostly kept to herself. Apollo and Adeline shared a look, and we have decided not to be neutral in this war. We want to step firmly onto the light side. We cannot play the fence in this war, and after the slights against our house by some of the dark houses, this is a firm way to do that and keep our daughters safe from the Malfoys. So that means that if we don't fulfill this contract, Harry began, then Daphne will have to marry Malfoy, and he will get the title of Lord Black. Can we at least divorce after the war? Harry asked hesitantly. Daphne looked at him in great offense and opened her mouth, but her mother beat her to response. I'm sure he means no offense, Daphne. He doesn't know all of our customs. Unfortunately, Harry, in the wizarding world there is no such thing as divorce. When you marry, you are bonded for life. The only way to escape a marriage is through very dark magic that could kill both participants. Harry nodded silently and then apologized quietly for offending Daphne. Daphne wiped her eyes inconspicuously. She whipped her head to the side to look at Harry and spoke, well, we better get to know each other, before the end of 7th year. She slumped in her seat. Harry gaped. You're just going to accept this? Daphne glared at him. What else are we supposed to do? I don't want to marry Malfoy, and if your godfather loses his position the Malfoys will gain 6 seats on the Wizengamot. You realize what that means? Harry shifted with a twitch. Sirius sighed. It means that the Malfoy family will control 10 seats, and it means that Voldemort will control ministry policy before the ministry truly falls. He can coerce policy in a puppet government without ever admitting influence. The only thing that is stopping that now is that my seats were unable to vote while I was in prison, and Amelia Bones is taking a hard stance against the Death Eaters and Voldemort. Harry was impressed when no one flinched at the name. Then he let out a great sigh. We don't even know each other. You have 2 years to rectify that issue, Adeline pointed out, before you have to have the bonding. She stood. Daphne, come with me, please. The two left, and Apollo left shortly after. They were trying to give Harry and Sirius a moment alone. The two stared at each other silently for a while. Sirius understood Harry's reluctance. His mother had been in the midst of signing a contract between him and Narcissa before he had run away and was struck from the family tree. Harry was quiet for a moment, before agreeing, nearly silently, I'll marry her, Sirius. I'll marry Daphne Greengrass. Not because of Voldemort and Malfoy, but because their family needs our help. Sirius nodded, somewhat proudly, that's the right reason to do it, Harry. Now, I've never been for the whole pureblood agenda shite, but there are some things you must do before you go back for your 6th year. You need to learn the rules. If we are going to get you through this war, we need to make sure you understand exactly what is going on around you. You'll be spending half of the summer with the Greengrasses, and Daphne will be spending the other half with us. Myself and Apollo will be tutoring you both to make sure you are ahead of Voldemort. As if she had been summoned, Daphne walked back into the room. Are we staying at Grimmauld Place? Harry questioned. Sirius shook his head, not anymore. I'm a free man, Harry. We're going to be staying in a real house. Where, sir? Daphne asked. Call me Sirius. I've already spoken with your parents, Daphne. She will flow you to headquarters sometime at the end of the week, so you can meet the family. Daphne folded her fingers, and as she sat down and nodded, she had just had a conversation with her mother that she was not sure that she would ever choose to have again. In fact, she hoped she would never have a conversation like that for the rest of her days. Her mother had informed her in not uncertain terms that if she did not comply with the wishes of her family, that either she or Astoria would be forced to marry Malfoy, and her mother explained exactly what that would entail. Of course, Sirius. Daphne paused. Mother, father, Sirius, do you mind giving us a moment alone, please? Sirius smiled lightly and stood, as Adeline offered to show Sirius some of the Greengrass family paintings. Daphne turned to Harry. Listen. I know what people say about me. I know they think that I'm cold, and I just want to protect my family. They are all I have left, just as Sirius is all you have left. I don't want to marry Malfoy, not because of what he may do to me, but because of what he could do to everyone else. Harry frowned. But you're a sly. Daphne glared at Harry before cutting him off. That's unfair. Do you think I want someone who indiscriminately kills everyone to win? He's a maniac. Not all purebloods believe in blood purity or Death Eaters. She looked at her hands where they grasped her cotton skirt. Tracy Davis is my best friend and she's a half-blood. She gets better marks than most of the people in our year, and I'm a quarter Vila. Don't you think I know what people think about that? I'm not a blood supremacist. Harry paused. I'm sorry, he admitted. I guess Malfoy and his gang. I think if we are going to make this work, we are both going to have to not make assumptions about each other. I'm sorry I assumed the worst. Do you think we can make this work? Daphne asked carefully. Harry shrugged. We don't have a choice, do we? Neither of us want this. But I think we can find a way to make it work. Daphne paused before she stood and turned to look at him. I'm going to pretend there's no contract, she said abruptly. Let's become friends, and maybe more without the contract over our heads. We can get to know each other. The right way. Harry smiled and stood. I think that's a great idea. In that case, call me Daphne. Then, call me Harry. Sirius and Daphne's parents arrived then and Sirius called Harry over. Well, we'd best be going. We've got things to do, Harry. They bid the family goodbye, and Harry lingered a moment before giving a firm nod to Daphne Greengrass. Sirius had insisted on buying Harry new clothes, now that he could freely spend his money. He took out about 200 galleons out of Gringotts and the two headed over to Twilfit and Tattings. What do you need so much for? Harry asked. It's only clothes, which you don't need to buy me, by the way. Nonsense, Harry. You need the clothes. The Dursleys haven't been dressing you too well. Besides, there's extra because I've got a plan for you. Sirius grinned broadly in a sly way. Harry frowned, following Sirius into the tailor's. He thought back to all of the other brilliant plans his godfather had had. Some still gave him nightmares. You've got a plan? That sounds dangerous. What have I told you about thinking? You have to leave it to those of us with human brains. Sirius glared at his godson. Yes, I've got a plan. It does happen, on occasion. I heard the end of your conversation with Daphne. I know, I wasn't supposed to, but I did. I think, if you want to start this off right, you should try to get to know her. I got this from her mother. He handed over a piece of parchment that had a few dozen things written down on it. These are things she likes. Maybe you could get her a few gifts for her birthday. It's coming up. Only a week after yours. Harry frowned. Isn't this cheating? Sirius shook his head. No, we're just trying to help you take those first few awkward steps. After that, you two are on your own. His voice trailed off at the end as she stared off into the distance. Harry followed his gaze. Sure enough, at the end of it was a buxom brunette witch with long curly hair. She was staring back. Harry kicked his uncle hard. Do you have to be such a lech? I'm still young, Harry, Sirius complained. Anyway, you've got to charm her, Harry. A girl like Daphne probably loves being pampered. The contract said her birthday is August 11th. Why don't you buy her a gift for every day leading up to her 16th birthday? That way you can impress her a little. Harry hesitated. I don't want her to think I'm buying her. Sirius smiled. It's not about the money, Harry. It's about the thought. That's what counts. Trust me, I know how to woo witches. Sirius led him away and Harry watched as the pretty brunette witch winked at Sirius and pressed her flow address on a piece of paper into his palm. Sirius circled his body and watched her backside sway as she walked away. See? I can get the ladies without even trying. Harry glared at him again in exasperation, but followed Sirius around for the next few hours as they shopped in Diagon Alley. A few hours later, Harry dumped the stuff that Sirius had bought him next to the things he had bought for Daphne on his bed in the room he and Ron shared. Blimey, mate. What's all that? Ron asked, sitting up quickly to look into the bags. Sirius took me shopping. Ron pulled out a pair of women's shoes in a dainty size. You wear girls' shoes? Ron asked. It's a gift. For who? Ron questioned, suspiciously. Did Harry like Hermione? Harry hesitated, but realized he had to tell his best mates about what they had discussed today, Daphne Greengrass. Hermione walked in at that moment and saw the shoes. Isn't she in Slytherin? Normally Hermione wouldn't have come this early in the summer, since she didn't get to see her parents as often as she would have liked. But she was still recovering from the Department of Mysteries, which meant that Andromeda Tonks, who was a certified Medi-Witch, was visiting her daily to check how she was healing. Harry told them all about the marriage contract. You have to marry a Slytherin? Ron was gaping. Then he paused. Well, I guess if you have to marry a junior Death Eater, it may as well be her. She's the hottest girl in our year. Frankly, Harry was starting to get really annoyed with his behavior. He felt guilty about that for a moment because he had had the same reaction when talking to Daphne earlier before she corrected him. Apparently, Hermione was as well because she replied, Ronald, stop being so obtuse. Not all Slytherins are like Pansy Parkinson and Malfoy. Ron snorted, may as well be. Not a wizard who has been in Slytherin that hasn't gone bad. Hermione glared at Ron. What about Pettigrew? He was a Gryffindor. Harry tried to stop his friends from fighting and cut in. Daphne isn't evil, and neither is her family. She's a bit standoffish, but she's not rude. And her parents are both pretty nice, if not stern. Ron scoffed. Hermione smiled proudly at Harry. Then her smile turned to a look of sympathy. For all it's worth, Harry, I do feel sorry for you. I know this isn't what you wanted. So Hermione had noticed the lingering glances he'd been giving Ginny after Cho and he had split. Harry sighed, it's not. But, there's no alternative. If I don't, Malfoy will, and that means Voldemort will have more money and more political support to pass legislation that could make his takeover easier. Besides, I don't think it will be so bad to be married to Daphne. We agreed we're going to try to become friends first, in any case. Hermione smiled again. She's very smart, you know. She's top of Slytherin. She and her friend Tracy Davis don't seem to talk to Malfoy and Parkinson's gang. In fact, I heard last year that Malfoy pursued Daphne relentlessly, and she said no 1,000 times. And he asked her to the Yule Ball, but she ended up going with a 7th year from Beauxbatons. Harry snorted. She's made it pretty clear she has no love lost for Malfoy. Anyways, she'll be coming later this week and staying for part of the summer, so we can get to know each other better. She's staying here? Ron gasped. What if she betrays us to you-know-who? Harry sighed. I told you, she isn't like that. And neither are her parents. Hermione glared at Ron. You couldn't try to be supportive of your friend, Ronald? Her voice began to rise in volume and pitch, and Harry jumped in quickly to try to distract her by asking what they had done that day. A few days later, the fireplace of the Black Estate revealed Daphne Greengrass and her parents. Daphne looked hesitant the moment she saw Ron Weasley. She knew of his infamous prejudice against Slytherin House. Some of it was warranted, after all. Many of her housemates weren't very nice people. But some were very nice. They just couldn't outwardly show they were against their own house, or they would be miserable at school. Greengrass. Hi, Hermione said, shaking her hand. I'm Hermione Granger. Ron glared and stormed out of the room, leaving Sirius, Hermione, Harry and the Greengrasses in the room together. They made pleasantries, and Hermione introduced herself to her best friend's future in-laws. Mr. and Mrs. Greengrass left promptly after kissing their daughter goodbye with promises of seeing her soon. So, Daphne, you'll be sharing the second-floor suite with me, Hermione said as she led Daphne up the stairs and towards the room they would share. Molly Weasley popped her head in as they left. Is she a? Harry resisted the urge to sigh heavily. He loved Mrs. Weasley, really. But sometimes she couldn't see past her own nose and her own agenda. He knew that she'd been trying to push him towards Ginny since his 2nd year. He'd never thought twice about some of the strange things she'd done in the past, until she'd snubbed Hermione 2 years before over what Rita Skeeter had written in The Prophet. "What are you doing allowing a Greengrass into this home? What if she works for you-know-who?" Molly began shrieking and Harry stood dumbly. What was he supposed to say? Molly was like a mother to him. She was just shouting at him. "Good grief, Molly, stop yelling. You sound like my mother," came a voice from around the corner. Sirius lounged at the doorway. "She's going to have to stay for a while anyway, Molly. I would let it go." "And why is that?" Molly hollered. Several members of the Order walked into the room, having heard the raised voices. Sirius smirked devilishly. "Well, they're going to be married one day. The future Lady Potter should know her family." There was a silence for a moment before the shrieking began again. Harry took that moment to escape from the noise. Daphne sat upstairs in the room she was sharing with Hermione. It was nice, and the bed was very comfortable. But it didn't make her feel any more welcome. She had heard the whole argument downstairs and was holding back tears before Hermione walked back in. "Hey, I'm really sorry, Daphne. They're a bit tactless sometimes," Hermione frowned. "What have you got to be sorry for, Granger? You didn't do anything." Daphne turned away from Hermione. She didn't want her to know she was crying. She felt pathetic. When did she begin to be a blubbering, sobbing girl? This whole situation was stressful. She didn't dislike Potter, or even Granger, but she'd had a few unpleasant interactions with the Weasleys in the past. Specifically, with Ginny a year prior and Ron several times before and after that. Hermione sat down next to Daphne. "You know, Daphne, I think we're going to be good friends. Harry seems to think you're a good person, and I trust Harry. I know you're overwhelmed. The Weasleys can be loud." At this, Daphne nearly burst into tears. I don't even know how to describe it. I'm mad that nobody told us that this could be a possibility. But I'm grateful I don't have to marry Malfoy, and I'm happy that Astoria will be safe. But I'm so scared. I've read The Prophet. Harry's got a target on his back, and that means that my family, who've just aligned themselves with the light, will have an even bigger target on their backs than before. This isn't fair. Not for me, and not for him. But I can't help but to hope that maybe it works out, and maybe we can be happy. And that's so selfish of me. People are dying, and disappearing every day, and all I want is to be happy." Hermione smiled sadly. "I know. I understand how you feel. I'm afraid for my parents. I'm scared that someone will try to hurt Harry by hurting me and hurting them. I know he would blame himself. And I know he would be upset if your family was hurt because of him. But I think you've got to move past this, or else you'll stop yourself from being happy." She handed the girl a handkerchief. "You all are so important to him, and I'm afraid. I don't want you all to hate me when I haven't even been given a chance yet. Everyone hates Slytherin. But I swear we're not all bad, it's just a few people who make us all seem terrible." Hermione nodded. "It's true. Slytherin and Death Eater aren't axiomatic. Tonks's mum, Andromeda, was a Slytherin, and she's an amazing woman." A knock came from the door, and Hermione stood to answer it. Harry stood in the doorway, sheepishly. Hermione nodded and walked out of the room after saying she would see Daphne later, leaving Harry and Daphne alone. "Hey, Daphne, I'm really sorry about this whole thing with Mrs. Weasley. Sirius is going off on her. Are you okay?" Daphne sniffed and turned away from him. "I'm fine." Harry sat down next to Daphne. "You don't sound very fine. In fact, you sound less fine than you did the other day." Daphne wiped the tears from her eyes. I'm scared, you know? We're in this incredibly awkward position, and I'm worried about my parents, and Astoria. And here I am trying to start dating for the first time because I've never been on a real date. It seems so silly compared to what's happening right now." "No, I understand. I only went on a date with Cho. It didn't work out so well. It was weird, you know? Since Cedric died. And now, I keep remembering that in 2 years we have to get married. It's definitely a little weird." "Do you still like her?" Daphne asked hesitantly. Harry snorted. "Definitely not. I really dislike Cho now, after what her friend Marietta did. Not that that is really Cho's fault, but you know, I think her response was cowardly. People got hurt because of what she did." Daphne stared at him intently. "What about the Weasley girl?" Harry blinked owlishly. "Ginny? Well, I thought maybe, at the end of the year, but that won't happen. Not just because of the contract," he hastened to clarify. "I just don't know if she sees me or the boy who lived." Daphne nodded. I understand. I know what the guys in our year say about me, Harry. I know what it's like for people to look at one part of you and take it as the truth. Well, I know there's more than that, Harry said firmly. Hermione's told me you do well in school. You care about your family. And you are against Voldemort. To me, that makes you a decent person. Plus, Harry started mischievously, you're the only girl who's a good amount shorter than me in our year. I've got to marry you, haven't I? Daphne broke into peals of laughter and sighed. She felt a little better already. I think we're off to the start of a great relationship, Harry. Daphne peeked her head out of her door and then quietly crept out into the hallway. She was 3/4 of the way there when a voice came from behind her. What are you doing? Daphne whirled around to find Harry staring at her with humor in his eyes. Are you hiding from someone? Harry asked loudly. Suddenly a loud, Harry James Potter, came from downstairs. Daphne winced at the woman's shrill voice as she started to storm up the stairs. Daphne grabbed Harry and pulled him into the nearest room. It happened to be a broom closet. Harry tried not to laugh. You were avoiding Molly? Daphne looked guilty at her shoe-covered feet. Yes. Harry started to laugh quietly before Daphne covered his mouth and put her finger to her lips. Be quiet or she'll find us. She's found all of my previous hiding spots. Every time she finds me she yells at me for a little longer. Yesterday she tried to make me do Ronald's laundry. Sirius came and distracted her. Which is the only reason I got away. Harry knit a brow. I've nothing against housework and manual labor, Daphne clarified. I just don't want to touch Ron Weasley's dirty drawers. Harry snorted and then replied, I kind of figured you were hiding from her. She's a bit much, and she's overbearing. She's really pulling out all the stops for you though. She doesn't even usually go after the twins this much. It's frustrating, but she's like a mum to me, so. Daphne sniffed quietly. I know. I tried so hard to get her to like me the last few weeks, and she just won't budge. I think she's mad that you won't end up with Ginny because of me. Harry frowned deeply and then sighed in resignation. Hermione and I came to that conclusion about a week ago. I just don't know why she thinks that would happen anyway. Maybe before, I might have considered it. But I'm not interested in Ginny like that, especially after how weird she's been the past few weeks. Harry was of course talking about the snide comments that Ginny was making about both Daphne and Fleur Delacour. Fleur had arrived only a few days after Daphne and was meant to stay in Ginny's room with her. That had ended in a screaming match between the two that meant Hermione and Fleur had had to swap rooms. Daphne and her cousin Fleur were now staying together in the second floor next door to the twins, and Ginny and Hermione were directly above them in the third-floor suite next to Remus. They'd been taking lessons together every morning with Sirius about the old ways, the ministry, politics, and tradition. Daphne knew most of the information already, so Sirius had incorporated some lessons and excursions out to the Muggle world in their daily lessons as well. A week prior they'd gone on an enlightening excursion to a Muggle amusement park that Daphne had loved. In the afternoons they worked on their summer assignments together with Hermione and occasionally Neville. Ron was skiving off and had no interest in doing his summer work at all. Remus was also tutoring Harry in several subjects, knowing that Harry needed all the help he could get if he was going to beat Voldemort. I have to take it more seriously, Harry had said to Sirius and Remus, especially now that I'm supposed to be protecting Daphne and her family. I've got to learn everything I can before it's too late. Daphne had volunteered to help Harry in potions, since she had maintained an O average in the class for the last 5 years without Snape's favoritism. The two of them were doing so well that Sirius had suggested the group take a nice holiday in France, where they could soak up the sun and enjoy the warm weather before returning to Scotland in September. Harry's birthday was only a few days away, and Sirius had suggested they go to a nice restaurant and hang around the south of France for a while. They would be staying through Daphne's birthday, and then Harry and Daphne would return to England and stay with the Greengrasses until school started. Hermione would stay in France and meet her parents in Switzerland, where they would be vacationing starting the day after Daphne's birthday. In the broom closet, the two spoke quietly about the deteriorating situation with the Weasleys. They're not all bad, Harry defended. The twins, Bill, Charlie, and Arthur are truly good people. Percy can be a bit of a ponce. Ron is supposed to be my best mate. I just don't understand where this sudden hostility is coming from. We were fine last year. But, fourth year was such a mess. I guess we just won't get past that. Daphne frowned. You never know. She paused. I think he might be jealous. Harry snorted. About money? He is. It's always the first thing he complains about. It's silly, and I've told him before. My parents died to give me money. I would trade every canute I have if it meant I got my parents back. Daphne shook her head. That's not what I meant, though I do see your point. He's definitely angry about his financial situation, and from what you've told me it's just gotten worse since you're no longer wearing rags. What I meant is I think he's jealous about Hermione. Harry furrowed his brows. What about Hermione? The two of them fight like cats and dogs. I know, Daphne agreed, but that's not what I mean. I think he likes her. Harry choked. No way. Not to slam my best mate, but I'm not even sure he knows Hermione's a girl. Daphne looked unconvinced. The two chatted quietly in the broom closet for a while until Daphne fell asleep, huddled in the corner. Harry smiled softly and picked her up, placing her in her bed and pulling up the covers. He hesitated before kissing her forehead and closing the door. He had to have an important conversation. Daphne awoke in her bed to shouts from downstairs. Why am I in bed? A blush crept up her face. She must have fallen asleep in the broom closet she and Harry had hidden in earlier. What? Roared a voice from downstairs. Daphne sat up suddenly and raced to her door to listen. I said not to yell, came Sirius' gruff voice. You'll wake up my mother. Portrait. Daphne tiptoed down the stairs and watched the exchange. And I said you need to stop being hostile to Daphne, Harry exclaimed loudly. Don't you yell at me, young man, replied Mrs. Weasley. I will not stand for it in this home. Ron stood behind his mother nodding his head angrily. Hermione sighed deeply from the side and tried to pull Ron away from the private conversation. He wrenched his arm away. My home, shrieked Sirius. Mine. You're a guest here. You've nearly worn out your welcome. If you can't treat her with respect, then you'll have to leave. Daphne went to the doorway and listened closer. Sirius Black, you awful, treacherous Molly happened to spot Daphne and narrowed her eyes. You, brazen Slytherin harlot. Before Daphne could even blink, both Sirius and Harry were crying out in offense. Hermione wanted to be surprised, but she wasn't. After Skeeter's article in The Prophet, Hermione hadn't trusted Mrs. Weasley as much as she had before. Clearly, Mrs. Weasley's opinions on the women outside of Ginny in Harry's life hadn't changed at all. Daphne came up behind Harry and pulled on his arm. Don't. What? Harry asked. He was trying to protect her honor. Isn't that what he was supposed to do? It made Daphne uncomfortable. She was touched he cared, but she didn't want him to ruin his relationship with the people he called family over her. She would rather they work it out so that they could all be together rather than try to force the Weasleys to like her. And if they never liked her, then she would just have to deal with it. But she knew Harry didn't have a family outside of them, Sirius and Remus, and she didn't want to be the reason he broke those relationships. Just let it go. It's not worth fighting over. I'll just leave. Molly gave a satisfied grin that spread to Ron behind her. That's right, Molly began. Sirius laughed loudly. She's not leaving, Molly, you are. Excuse me. Molly sputtered. I'm tired of you walking around my house screaming, shouting and frankly ing about everything. Get out. I want you out of my house by this evening. Molly bared a shocking resemblance to a fish and blinked. She turned completely red. Fine. Everyone, pack your things. We're leaving. Fred and George took that moment to appear. We're not leaving, Mum, said Fred. Wouldn't think of it, agreed George. Sirius and Remus are expert pranksters, they both exclaimed. We must learn from the best if our store's going to be successful. Plus, our lab is here. Molly turned a bright red and stormed up the stairs to pack her bags. As Ron walked by Harry he said, Doesn't have to be this way, mate. You're picking a Slytherin over family. He shook his head and followed the direction that Molly had left in. After Molly, Ron, Arthur and Ginny had left Sirius' new home. Sirius along with Remus, Harry, Daphne, and Hermione set out to travel down to St. Martin. But, why the French Riviera? Daphne asked Sirius. There are plenty of hot babes. Hermione turned ash white and stared at her feet. Harry put his face in his hands. Please, Daph, just ignore him. Daphne flushed. Daph? She questioned. This time, Harry turned a bright scarlet. Oh. Sorry. I didn't. Should I not call you that? Daphne started to grin. "You can call me whatever you like, Harry." Harry and Daphne soon figured out the real reason that Sirius had chosen Nice. There were quite a few nude and topless Muggle beaches. Sitting on a private neighborhood beach, Harry kept his face staring downwards at his book. He wasn't really reading it, but the idea of looking up to have a few women's s in his face in front of his fiancée was not appealing in the least. After all, even though it was a private beach, there were still a few people meandering about. It was Saturday on a particularly nice day during the summer at around noon. Daphne, however, was completely enjoying the topless beach. She had a plan, after all. She wanted Harry to kiss her. She'd been sending signals all summer, and she was getting tired of him to take the hint and plant one on her. So, she was going to rile him up until he finally sealed the deal and gave her one hell of a kiss. Harry glanced slightly to the side and realized that Daphne was in the processes of going topless. He couldn't see anything, but she didn't have her top on. He flinched and noticed Sirius giving him winks from 10 feet away. Harry made a disgusting sound and tried to relax on his beach towel. Daphne's head turned towards him. "Does this bother you, Harry?" she asked softly. Because I wouldn't want to bother you. I just want to get a good tan." "It doesn't bother me," Harry exclaimed. Sirius rolled his eyes and snorted, "Smooth, pup." "Shut up, mutt," Daphne smiled. "That's good then." Harry nodded awkwardly. "So, it wouldn't bother you if I sunbathed face up?" All of the color drained from Harry's face and Sirius started to snicker and got up to leave the couple alone and head towards a voluptuous redhead that was serving drinks at the tiki bar nearby. Harry wasn't stupid, and he knew Daphne wasn't either. Daphne knew that even without her Vila blood she was pretty, but her allure made her nearly irresistible. Her lying topless next to him was going to make this a very hard afternoon for him. And he knew that Daphne had most certainly done this on purpose. Yes. No, it won't bother me." Daphne gave a small smile. "All right, you gave me the go." Daphne turned face up and smiled into the sun. "Have you always had that mole there?" Harry asked thoughtlessly. Then he cursed himself. He shouldn't have said anything. What would she think of him, now? Daphne looked at him. "This one?" "Yes." She smirked a little bit more and he started to blush and lay down. They were silent for a few hours, as Daphne napped and Harry read their new Dada textbook inconspicuously on the beach. Hermione was napping too, but she was lying on her chest. Remus was floating in the water in front of them, and Sirius had waved at him from where he and his one-night stand were disappearing off to. Harry wasn't sure if this was a test. Was he supposed to pretend she wasn't topless? Or was he supposed to, "I'm going nuts. My nuts are going nuts. I keep staring at them. They are rather lovely. I wonder what they feel like. Are S heavy? Probably. They're a nice size too. Do you think she'd mind if I touched them?" "Of course she would mind, you pervert." Harry blushed even harder and tried to focus. Daphne being asleep was making it hard for Harry to stop ogling her chest. Hermione had woken up a half-hour previous and had left to join Remus under the shade of the tiki bar. A while later, Daphne woke up with a stretch and a yawn. "Merlin, please stretch like that again." Suddenly, Harry realized why Sirius was so obsessed with women and if it was with women as beautiful as Daphne, Harry completely understood the appeal. He thought Cho was pretty, but he realized that was mostly due to the fact that he admired her Quidditch abilities. Daphne was attractive in a different way. Yes, she was physically attractive, with her naturally glowing skin, white gold hair, and violet eyes. But after the last few weeks they had spent getting to know each other, Harry liked her for other reasons too. He liked the way she smiled when she talked to Hermione. He liked that she went along with the twins' jokes, and he liked how she was patient when he said stupid stuff in their private lessons. Most of all, he liked that she valued family. It was what she cared about the most, and Harry found that incredibly attractive. If he was being honest, he had thought of Daphne as more of a friend for a while, maybe even since he had met her. Daphne smiled at him. "The sun is starting to set, Harry." Is it? I didn't notice." Daphne smiled. "Harry, there's no one else here." He looked around. How had he missed that there was no one else on the beach? "Because you've been looking at her s for hours, that's why." Harry let out a bit of a sigh, and Daphne sat to her knees while she pulled her bikini top back on. "Harry, I did this on purpose. I want you to look at me." I thought you said you didn't like it when guys looked at you. Daphne smiled and shrugged. You're not just any guy, are you, Harry? Harry started to lean in, and Daphne leaned in too. Harry? She whispered, will you kiss me? He was flustered, but he plucked up his Gryffindor courage and leaned in and kissed her deeply. It was nothing like kissing Cho. Daphne was a shy kisser, but she soon kissed him deeper until she was pulling away while taking deep breaths. Suddenly, Daphne turned away and put her sundress over her head. Let's go in, Harry. I'm starved. Harry followed her in a kiss-induced daze. Dear Harry. I don't know what has gotten into you, mate, but Mum and I want you to come back to the burrow right now. That girl I dangerous. She's a snake, Harry. Ginny is worried about you. Harry snorted and threw the letter into his waste bin. Suddenly he heard a slight whimper from next door. He pressed his ear against the wall and listened closely. I don't know what's wrong with me. Nothing's wrong with you, soothed Daphne. It happens all the time. Not to me it doesn't. It happened with Victor Crumb. It doesn't happen with Remus Lupin. Of course it does. Girls have crushes on older men all the time. Hermione snorted and whimpered. It's not just a crush, Harry opened the door and stepped in. Both girls gasped and looked up. Yo, you can't tell anyone. Harry, tell him, Harry stated. Hermione gasped. I can't do that. Why not? Daphne asked brightly. Because I just can't. You know what he'll say. What's the worst that could happen? Harry asked. He says no if he does, then you can move on. Hermione sniffled doubtfully, but Harry grabbed Hermione's hand and pushed her out the door and down the stairs of the beach home they had rented. Daphne smiled as Hermione meekly stepped into the other room. Later on, Hermione would tell Daphne that Remus had been waiting for her to say something for ages. He'd apparently known since third year, which was why he had worked so hard to avoid being in close proximity with her since then. Remus sighed. This isn't the time. Why not? Hermione demanded. Why can't now be the time? Because we're about to fight in a war, snapped Remus. That isn't an excuse, Hermione cried back. We could be dead this time next year and you want to live life like we have all the time in the world. That's not true, he replied angrily. I know we don't have time. I know I don't have time. We can't be together, Hermione. It isn't right. To his horror, Hermione began to tear up. Deep within him, his wolf stirred angrily. Do you not want me? Remus clamored to correct himself. That isn't it at all, I swear it. He would hurt you, Hermione. The things that he would do to have you should terrify you. No, Hermione said angrily, it terrifies you. You're afraid that if we get together, if we mate, I will reject you when I see the side of you that you hide. But I won't. I love Moony just as much as I love you, Remus, because he is part of you. He'd worn down after that, and with a kiss, Moony had claimed Hermione Granger. On July 26th, Harry sent Hedwig with a gift for Neville's birthday. He, Daphne and Hermione had found a rare silver oak tree sapling. It would need attention over the summer, but they were sure the Neville could grow the tree perfectly in Sprout's greenhouse over the winter. Sirius had suggested a trip into Paris for Harry's birthday. He'd always wanted to go to Disney, especially since the Dursleys had gone several times without him. Sirius had been once with Remus, James, and Peter, and Hermione had gone several times when she was very young. Daphne had never been, and was excited to see it after listening to Hermione rave about some of her favorite Disney films from her childhood, specifically Fantasia. They'd also planned a day in Versailles, and some shopping in Paris. Daphne had spent summers in France her whole life, with her mother's family, and was excited to explore Muggle Paris with Hermione and Harry. Remus and Sirius agreed that they would follow at a safe distance in case Death Eaters appeared, but they would leave the teenagers alone for the most part. The morning of July 27th, Daphne shook Harry awake around 9 a.m. to convince him to move faster. We're going into Muggle Paris today, she reminded him, and I have shopping to do. Tracy sent me the new edition of Vogue and there's a pair of shoes from Dior I want. Harry groaned but agreed to get up. Half an hour later, he was showered, dressed, and finishing his breakfast sleepily with his friends. They spent most of the day shopping, but Daphne had bought a Muggle camera and had been taking pictures of them all day. Hermione promised to print them and the two chatted away while Harry started to fall asleep in one of the few comfy chairs in the store. About an hour later, he was nudged hard by Hermione. Wazza, Daphne needs your help choosing an outfit for her birthday dinner, she's over there. Harry looked at her doubtfully. I'm not the person to help with that, he pointed out, looking down at his blue and black striped t-shirt and trainers. Hermione shrugged. Get up, Potter. It's my turn to nap. Harry groaned and stalked off towards a halo of white blonde hair 2 aisles away while Hermione kept his seat warm. Daphne turned around when he got into the mini-boutique within the department store. Which one? She asked, holding up a light pink sequined mini-dress and a white crushed velvet mini-dress. He began. And if you pick this one, she said, it goes with these shoes. The other one goes with these. Didn't you just buy a pair of shoes? And didn't I just buy you 3 pairs of shoes over the summer? Daphne gave him a withering stare. So, I like shoes. Besides, the shoes I bought today were for a formal occasion. I need something to wear for my birthday. She held up the dresses again. So? Which one? He trailed off. Daphne rolled her eyes. You are so unhelpful. All right. Well, I'll just buy both, then. The sales associate grinned widely. She probably worked on commission because as Harry swiped his Gringotts card her smile widened even deeper. All right. Hermione and I have one more thing planned for today, Daphne said to Harry. Hermione groaned. Do we have to? Daphne shot her a dirty look. Do you want to fix that rat's nest on your head or not? Remus and Sirius snorted from behind her. Harsh, Daph, said Harry. Oh please, Daphne retorted. Hermione is the one who wanted me to fix her hair. So, I'm bringing her to the salon my cousin, my sister and I go to. That was when Sirius butted in. Could they do my hair as well? Daphne barked out a laugh. We're all booked for a haircut. You don't think I would miss an opportunity to fix this mess, would you? She replied, as she pointed at the giant cowlick sticking up from the back of Harry's head. Harry scowled. I've tried everything and the only thing that works is sleekeasies. Sirius nodded. That's right. Dad invented that to help with his and James's hair, so I suppose it would work on yours, he continued as they stopped into a hair salon hidden from Muggle view. Harry, your granddad invented sleekeasies? Hermione asked in amazement. Of course, Daphne replied. The Potters have always been a wealthy house, but from what I understand the inventions of your grandfather are what quadrupled your family fortune. Sleekeasies has been incredibly profitable. The group left 2.5 hours later, all looking a bit better than they had in a while. I can't wait to go to Versailles tomorrow, Hermione said. My parents never had time to go, so I've never seen it. I can't wait to see the Hall of Mirrors. Hermione continued to spout off facts all about Versailles and the last monarch to live there. Harry got his presents in the morning as soon as he woke up. A pair of knitted socks from Dobby, knitting patterns from Dumbledore, and some chocolate frogs from Neville were on top of the pile. Over crepes for breakfast, Sirius gave Harry a new broom kit and a set of Charm Seeker googles. Hermione gave him a book on defense spells and a book on wizarding law, and Remus gave him a pair of self-warming gloves. The twins had sent over some of their joke products, and Luna had given him a pair of Spectrospecs and a Weird Sisters shirt. Finally, Daphne handed him a leather-bound book. When he opened it, he nearly cried. Daphne had gathered a few photos of his parents, probably from their friends, and had compiled those photos as well as the ones from their trip and several other photos Hermione had provided. Thank you, guys, he said thickly. After all those years with the Dursleys, Harry truly appreciated the gifts that had been given to him. Well, said Sirius, who's ready for Disney? Their day at Disney was far more enjoyable than Harry thought it could have been. Daphne and Hermione had gotten matching sparkly mouse ears, and were enjoying a turkey leg in the shade while they waited for Remus to finish in the loo. This is so tasty, she exclaimed. I can't believe it. I was a little skeptical about Muggle food, but this is rather nice. It's crap, Hermione said. It's terrible for you, but I will say the turkey legs are delicious. Hurry and eat more before Remus comes back. He'll eat the whole thing, Sirius said, side effect of his furry little problem. As a gift for their first trip to Disney, Sirius had sprung for a special pass that allowed them to skip lines. They raced around the park for hours. Daphne had been in awe, but had also been slightly nervous about some of the rides. After their first amusement park trip earlier in the summer, she'd been less apprehensive, but she was still wary of some of the rides. Hermione, having gone several times before, had pointed out the best rides. She checked her watch. The fireworks will be starting soon. Sirius reserved us a special seat to watch the fireworks. Let's head over after we're done eating. They were sat, watching the fireworks when Daphne turned to Harry. "Harry, he replied. "Thank you," she whispered. "Sirius paid, not me," Harry chuckled. Daphne swatted him and then put her head on his shoulder. "Prat. That's not what I meant. I mean, thank you for showing me all these new things. I don't want to be ignorant about muggles and the muggle world. I like it. And I like your family. And, I like you." She started blushing hard as Harry met her eyes. "I like you too," he replied with a small smile. "Do you?" Daphne faltered. "Can we be more than friends?" "Aren't we already?" Harry asked. "We're going to get married." "I know," Daphne replied, "but I'm asking you as a girl if there were no contract. Can we officially start dating?" Harry smiled. "Yeah, I think we can." And as the fireworks cracked in front of them, Daphne and Harry had their second kiss. On August 1st, owls came down to Harry, Daphne and Hermione on the beach. Inside, Harry found his book list, and out dropped a Quidditch captain badge. He yelped excitedly, and showed Sirius immediately. Daphne frowned and opened her letter as well. A shiny prefect badge sat inside. She screwed up her face in confusion and looked at the address. It was her name. It was her address. "Everyone who joined the inquisitorial squad lost their prefect position," Hermione explained, as she read the letter attached to her prefect badge. Daphne's face was surprised. "I didn't even know Dumbledore knew I existed." Daphne laughed. Then she paused and shared a look with Hermione. Dumbledore had visited them twice at Grimmauld Place that summer and it hadn't been the best interaction. Dumbledore was not happy that Daphne and Harry were betrothed. Daphne understood why he wouldn't be pleased that the contract existed, and even that it was her, but it seemed that Dumbledore's main issue was that Harry was having a romantic relationship with anyone at all. Hermione and she had picked up on that after Dumbledore had stopped Molly from mentioning Ginny's crush on Harry in the kitchen several weeks prior. Daphne knew there was something odd about it, and Hermione had agreed. Neither one had mentioned it to Harry, as Harry's faith in Dumbledore was unshakable. Harry laughed lightly and put his letter and badge into Daphne's beach bag as they headed back towards the beach house they'd rented. Sirius and Remus were discussing how proud James would have been that his son had become Quidditch team captain. "Putting something in there again, Potter? Do you want me to break my back by the end of this trip?" she asked sternly. Harry blushed scarlet. "It's not too heavy, is it?" Daphne giggled. "No, I was only teasing you." Hermione scoffed from the side of them as the pair began to blush in silence. Daphne turned towards her. "You're just jealous because Remus had business to attend to today." This time, Hermione's face turned a bright red. Daphne and Harry started to laugh heartily. About an hour later, the group decided to leave the beach and head to Wizarding Nice. As they were walking up the hill, a single pearl shone through the dirt in the sand. Harry picked it up, and realized he didn't have any pockets. Daphne rolled his eyes. "You can put it in my bag." Harry grinned and followed the girls up to the house to change. At first, Harry had been against buying their supplies in St. Martin. "They speak French," Harry said, seriously. He didn't want to sound condescending, but he thought it should have been obvious that everything would be in French and that all the books would also be in French. Hermione rolled her eyes. "Harry, I speak proficient French." The Daphne smiled. "I'm a pureblood. I learned French, and of course, Latin, Greek, Spanish and Italian," she said with an eye roll. Harry choked. He had known she was smart, but honestly. "Also, they've got a pretty good English section here," Remus pointed out. "This is a popular holiday location for British wizards because it's warm and it's close. Look, there's the bookshop. Let's see what our lists say." Sirius cut in. "Harry and I have some business down the road. We'll meet you in front of the robing store in an hour." Hermione, Daphne, and Remus headed off towards the bookstore, intending to buy Harry's books while they were there. "Thanks, Sirius," Harry said gratefully. "So, what is it you wanted to buy?" he questioned as they snuck into the jeweler's. Harry opened his palm and inside was a shiny pearl. He showed it to the wizened wizard behind the counter. "Can I get this made into a pendant, please? Set in white gold?" "Of course," the wizard agreed. "I can have it done early next week." "Excellent," Harry said. "Do you have a pair of pearl earrings that match this one?" The wizard showed Harry a set of pearl studs set with diamonds around them. "These are the only pearls we have in a similar color that are set in white gold." "All right," Harry said. Can you set the pearl I gave you with diamonds around it to match? The wizard looked pleased that he would be making more money than expected. I can. To set the pendant in white gold, with diamonds, the chain, and the earrings it will cost 128 galleons. Harry didn't think that was too unreasonable. Uncle Vernon had once spent twice that on an earring and necklace combination for Aunt Petunia. He couldn't wait to give it to her birthday. Maybe they could kiss again. The days passed slowly on the beach. Harry had tanned to a nice peachy brown and Hermione's skin radiated with the warmth of the sun. Daphne had gotten less color, but seemed to glow. They'd been taking day trips around the French Riviera and occasionally across the border into Italy and Monaco. Daphne was teaching Harry French and he was teaching her how to play Muggle board games. Hermione had finished a record number of books that summer, and was proud to declare she had finished all of her pleasure reading, academic reading, and personal research reading for the entire summer, which she said meant that she could move on to the books she had planned to read next summer. Harry thought that was odd, but he wasn't surprised. Neville had traveled to meet his friends on August 2nd, and had been enjoying seeing them outside of school. He'd brought copies of The Prophet and they couldn't help but discuss what they'd seen in the papers. But she escaped? Asked Daphne to clarify. Yes, Neville said. You know who himself went after her, too. And she's not the only one, Neville said with his eye twitching. There was a mass breakout at Azkaban. We knew that was coming, though, didn't we? Does that mean Susan's in hiding with her aunt? Hermione asked, not wanting to talk about Bellatrix at all. She could still remember how upset Neville had been when the Cruciatus had been mentioned during fourth year. You're friends with Susan, aren't you? Yes, Neville replied in affirmative, and I'm assuming so. Her parents died in the First War, so Madame Bones took her in. Neville shuddered. I'm glad she's bringing the Death Eaters to justice, but Madame Bones is truly terrifying. More or less than Professor Snape? Daphne sniped playfully. They were all silent, and Daphne thought she might have gone too far until Hermione and Harry simultaneously burst into laughter, with Neville following after. I can't believe they published this rubbish, Harry ground out when he flipped to the next edition of The Prophet. The headline questioned whether Dumbledore was ready to face you-know-who in a duel. This is ridiculous, Harry continued. Dumbledore is the one person Voldemort's afraid of. Hermione and Neville shared a look and Daphne replied, yes, but he's getting old. He must be 120 now. Yeah, Harry said, but Voldemort's about 70. They're not that far apart. Daphne shrugged. Even wizards die of old age, Harry. And Voldemort must know he can't win the war unless he gets rid of Dumbledore and you. Hermione cut in. And you saw him when he came to headquarters this summer, Harry. There's something wrong with his arm. It looks like the limb is dead. Daphne frowned deeply. I checked in some of the Black family texts and I haven't seen anything about what would cause that. I had thought it might be a curse, but the only thing I saw that would have caused something similar is a potion that kills limbs so they can be amputated and regrown. Hermione screwed up her face. That's disgusting. Daphne edged her head to the side. You don't kill limbs before you remove them in the Muggle world? Hermione snorted. No, they knock you out and then cut it off. Daphne opened her mouth in horror. They just cut off? While you're asleep? You can't feel it, Harry assured Daphne and Neville. Neville was looking particularly green and Harry didn't really blame him, since the idea of amputating a limb made him a little sick as well. They use a chemical that puts you to sleep and cuts off all sensations of pain, Hermione clarified clinically. This is getting off track, Neville finally cut in. The point is, Dumbledore isn't getting any younger, which is why the Prophet has been publishing this. He pulled out another edition of the newspaper from his rucksack and dropped it in front of Harry. Boy Who Lived the Chosen One. Hermione groaned when she saw the byline was by Rita Skeeter. Neville snorted. Considering how bad she usually is, she got most of this right. How? Harry questioned. Nobody but a few of us actually know the prophecy. I don't understand how they could have any idea that I'm the chosen one. A broken clock is right twice a day, Daphne replied pensively, and it's not as though the Prophet cares that they get stuff right or wrong. They just want to sell papers. Meanwhile, Hermione twitched in righteous rage as she read aloud. Potter, known for his previously poor decisions such as dating Hermione Granger, Muggle-born, 16, G should make sure to prepared for you-know-who. Daphne choked on her laughter when Hermione continued undeterred. For more about Harry Potter, turn to page 7. For more about his womanizing godfather, Lord Sirius Orion Black, Turn to page 9. To read more about Hermione Granger ensnaring Harry Potter and Victor Crumb with love potions from 1994-1995, continue to page 5. Hermione looked up before crunching the paper into a ball and throwing it into the trash. Why can't she shut up about that? Hermione threw her hands into the air, especially because she knows it's not true. I mean honestly. This year is going to be terrible, Harry complained as he fell back against the sand. I can't take the flaky people at Hogwarts. Every year they change their mind about me. First I'm the boy who lived, then I'm Slytherin's heir, and everyone's thought I'm a liar for the last 2 years. I swear if they flip back to worshipping me I may crawl into the room of requirement and never leave for the whole year. And now they're just going to be worse since Witch Weekly keeps publishing you as the most eligible bachelor, Neville pointed out much to Harry's distress. Don't forget about your fan club, snickered Daphne, they're going to be out for blood. If they can marry you know they can be the lady chosen one. Harry sat up. What fan club? Oh please, Daphne said, swatting him with a rolled up newspaper, those annoying girls who follow you everywhere. Harry looked adorably confused and Daphne dropped her jaw. You can't seriously tell me you haven't noticed that more than half of the girls at school have been trying to snag the Potter ring for 5 years? Hermione laughed and then replied matter-of-factly, he hasn't noticed at all. He spent 3rd, 4th, and 5th year mooning over Cho. Hey! Harry exclaimed, turning red. He mumbled something but nobody caught what he said. Who's the president of that fan club, again, Hermione? Daphne questioned. Hermione started to blush and stutter. How should I know? Didn't you go to their first meeting first year? Daphne needled. I know you went. So did you. And all the other girls in our year except Pansy Parkinson, Hermione forced out. Harry looked horrified and Neville was on the ground laughing so hard he thought he might throw up. Instead of being embarrassed, Daphne responded, Hey, Hermione, then she continued with a big grin, did you use Armortentia or? The boys started laughing even harder as Hermione yelled out, not you too. On August 10th, the group was ready to go out for Daphne's birthday. Sirius had booked them rooms in the Monte Carlo in Monaco. He'd also snuck them alcohol, which Remus highly disapproved of. Hermione and Daphne had gotten ready together in their room and then had joined Harry and Neville to drink a little in their room. This is so exciting, said Hermione, breaking the rules. Neville looked at her incredulously. 5th year changed you. You're too keen on vigilante justice. Harry, we've made a menace of Hermione Granger. The group laughed and made their way down to the restaurant within the hotel. They ate a spectacular meal followed by a huge cake with glowing Muggle sprinklers in it. Daphne opened her presents at the restaurant and was excited about everything she'd gotten. Tracy had sent her some makeup. Astoria had sent her a bracelet she'd beaded with DGS on it and her youngest sisters sent her a few pictures they had very badly colored. She loved them anyway. Hermione had given her a Muggle fiction book that she thought Daphne may enjoy, and Neville gave her some tulip bulbs. Her parents had sent her a pair of amethyst hair combs that had been her grandmother's, and Sirius had gifted her a set of gold leaf, hand-painted tarot cards. Remus had given her some chocolates, and the twins sent her a card saying they had a pygmy puff waiting for her in England. Finally, Harry had given her a square box. It made her nervous. She wondered if maybe she had triggered him to move too fast. If this was a ring, she would smile, but she just wasn't ready yet. She thought they were supposed to be feeling each other out before they made it official. She was surprised when she instead found a matching pearl necklace and earring set. She thanked them all and they continued to eat their cake and be merry. They clapped, and danced, and drank champagne and then gambled for a while when they were too tired to dance anymore. At midnight they had set off mini fireworks sent from the twins and finally it was past 2 in the morning and they were trudging off to bed. Did you have a good birthday? Harry asked as he walked her back to her room. Daphne giggled and kissed him on her cheek. Yes. And I love the necklace and earrings you got me. I'm glad, he said as he leaned in to kiss her. Hey, Daph? She replied. Want to make it official? Be my girlfriend? Daphne smiled widely. I didn't think this birthday could get better, but it has. Yes, Harry. She leaned in to kiss him again, and Harry forgot everything else. All packed, pup? Sirius questioned as his godson started shoving his trunk close. Looks like, Harry replied. I've just go to grab my broom from downstairs and Hedwig from outside. Daphne had gone home the day before to get settled back in with her family, and Harry had taken the day to pack all of his supplies for school and for his extended visit to his girlfriend's house. Daphne and Astoria greeted Harry and Sirius when they arrived. "Fern," Daphne said, "could you take Harry's things to his room?" As house elf, that Harry assumed was Fern bowed deeply and then took his trunk and Hedwig to wherever he would be staying for the next few weeks. Astoria grinned widely and rushed to hug Harry tightly. "Hello, Harry." Daphne sighed. "Tori, we talked about this." Astoria gripped him tightly. "He's going to be my brother, Daph." Then she turned to Harry. "Excuse me, Harry, how did you slay the basilisk?" Daphne groaned. "Harry, this is my very annoying younger sister, Daphne." "I'm not very annoying," Astoria insisted, "just persistent. Ada and Marcella are annoying." "Ada?" Harry mouthed. "Marcella? Our younger sisters," Daphne clarified. "Ada is 6 and Marcella is 4. That made sense. Daphne had gotten some ill-drawn pictures of herself in the mail at her birthday and had said they were from her younger sister. Harry had been confused, because Astoria should have been out of the coloring phase. "Why don't you talk about them?" "Don't really know them all that well, do I?" Daphne replied. "They were born while I was at Hogwarts and I'm gone most of the year. I love them, anyway, even though me being home is like some sort of rare oddity." "Where are they now?" Harry asked curiously. Daphne shrugged. "Off playing somewhere, I suppose. They're quite mischievous. Especially Ada. She might be part trickster because that girl gets away with just about everything." It's weird, Harry thought, because Daphne never spoke about her family much at all. But he also remembered that he's never asked much about her family life. He barely even knew anything about Astoria. And, he realized, he didn't talk about his family much either. In fact, he's sure he's never talked about the Dursleys with Daphne. Even thinking about his mother's magic-hating family killed his good mood quickly. "When's Tracy coming?" Harry asked. "Next week, I think," Daphne replied. "She's coming from Blaze's villa in Italy to visit for a few days." Hermione would be impressed by how perceptive Harry has become because he quirked his brow and asked, "Are they a thing?" Daphne shrugged. "Tracy wants them to be a thing. But I don't know if Blaze is committed. All I know is if he tries anything with her I'll hex his dangly bits off." Harry flinched. Thoughts of losing his manhood scared him more than facing Voldemort. He should have been more worried about the continuation of his lessons with Apollo. Apollo's lordship lessons were draining. Mostly because they were far more rigorous than the ones that he'd been taking with Sirius earlier in the summer. It would have been nicer if they allowed Daphne and Harry to go out and explore occasionally, but Adeline was very stern about etiquette lessons at every mealtime. Honestly, Harry was ready to Avada himself and save Voldemort the trouble if it meant he didn't have to hear about the proper ways to ask a lady to dance at a gala versus a ball again. So, Daphne wasn't surprised when she found him beating his head against the wall in her room after he finished reading his defense text for the year. "That bad?" Daphne laughed as she rolled up her transfiguration work. "Worse," Harry groaned as he flopped onto the settee across the room. "How did you memorize all this garbage, anyway?" Daphne snorted. "It has its place. And it's necessary in Slytherin. We follow older rules, so you stick out pretty badly if you don't know how to plot over high tea. Trust me, it could be worse." Harry looked at her in disbelief, and Daphne smiled sweetly. "After we were officially betrothed my mother spent an hour and a half describing what would happen to me if I didn't have the gift of virginity to you." Harry choked and then sat up. "They don't think we—" "Oh no," Daphne said with assurance. "They put an anti-coitus spell on the whole manor that prevents anyone underage from breaking chastity, and I was only allowed to stay with you over the summer if I vowed not to let you plunder my depths as my mother called it." "What the F?" he begins as Daphne's door opens. "Ah, Marcella." "Hiya," she says in a jumble. "Harry, I've got a question." "Oh, for Merlin's sake," Daphne moaned. "Of course she does." Marcella looked crestfallen. "Daph, Mama says that questions are sign of an acquisitive nature." "Inquisitive," Daphne corrected, "not acquisitive." Marcella shrugged and climbed to sit next to Harry on the settee. She badgered him with questions about muggles for at least an hour and a half before she fell asleep, drool and all. "Your little sisters are adorable," Harry said with a small smile. He liked children, and Daphne's sisters were the best sort of children, especially Marcella. She would be a Hufflepuff for sure. "I love them," Daphne agreed with warm fondness in her voice, "even if they're annoying." Tracy had finally arrived to spend the day, and Harry quickly learned that Daphne and Tracy were even worse together than Daphne and Hermione. Tracy was good people, surely, but the two of them had so many inside jokes about things that Harry had no interest in. For example, Tracy kept whinging about how much she missed Italian sausages and prosciutto. Daphne's snickering when Harry had suggested that they go to an Italian restaurant had clued him in on the fact that Tracy wasn't actually talking about lunch meats at all. If Harry had to describe Tracy, he would certainly call her wild. Daphne hid her willfulness well under a mask of courtesy and icy contempt. Yes, she was well-mannered, but she loved to tease. Tracy wore it on her face as plain as day. He kind of liked Tracy, and he liked how happy she made Daphne. The two got on like a house on fire, and Harry honestly believed that life was better with good friends. He didn't really have a family, except for the one he made, and Tracy was the family that Daphne had made. When Harry had asked her how she had gotten into Slytherin when she should have been a Gryffindor with her boldness, Tracy smirked and replied, "Say, Harry, would you ever guess a girl could be a snake in lion's clothes?" When she had left, Daphne had confirmed that Tracy was far sneakier than he could have guessed, even though she hid it well. "That was the beauty of Slytherins," Daphne explained. "We see things differently than the rest of the houses. It gives us an advantage, sometimes." It explained a lot, Harry thought, and it explained why Dumbledore had allowed Adeline and Apollo into the Order of the Phoenix so easily. Mad Eye hadn't been happy about that, but Sirius and Remus had vouched for the couple, and they had given their vows to defeat Voldemort immediately. It had caused a fight for sure. Molly Weasley started ranting about the Greengrasses taking advantage because of Harry and Daphne, and the older Vila woman hadn't held back her vicious response. It had also caused another fight between Molly and Fleur, as Fleur had taken offense to her aunt being insulted. From what they had all heard from Remus and Sirius, it had been a terrible meeting, and Harry couldn't help but wonder if there was any point to the order at all. The next morning, Tonks had arrived to bring Daphne and Harry to Diagon Alley before they left for Hogwarts in a few more days. Daphne had penned a missive to Hermione and Neville a few days prior, asking if she had any last-minute shopping and whether she would want to join them. Hermione, as Daphne had expected, had wrote back immediately with plans to get a few more books at Flourish and Blots before September 1st. St. Neville had also agreed, because he needed to buy dress robes. "I'd like to see the twins shop," Daphne said, "and get my pygmy puff. I saw in Witch Weekly that they're pretty adorable." Cute things, Harry gagged. He would endure the fluffy monstrosity if it meant that Daphne had a new pet. Daphne had a half-Kneasel cat named Anaxia who had gotten along marvelously with Crookshanks. "I've got to go to the bookstore," Hermione said, "and we've both got to go to Twilfit and Tattings, right Daphne?" "That's right," Daphne agreed, "but we've got to go to Gringotts first anyway." When they left the bank with enough money to last them the school year, they made their way to the twins' new storefront. "It's certainly got character, hasn't it?" Neville joked as they passed through the door. And he was entirely correct. It was loud, colorful, vivacious, and everything Harry could have imagined in a shop owned by Fred and George. Fred noticed him immediately and glided over to them with a warm grin. "Hiya, Harry, Hermione, Daphne, Neville. Daphne, if you head over to George, he can give you that pygmy puff we put aside for your birthday." Daphne thanked him, and she and Hermione moved towards George, who was stacking boxes on the far left side of the store. When they walked away, Fred turned to Harry. "I've got some things in the back for you, mate. Follow me." On their way, Fred passed a blonde girl. "Verity, could you hold the front for a few minutes?" "Sure, Mr. Weasley," the girl replied as she tightened her bright purple apron and walked towards the cash tills. "Back here," Fred beckoned, opening a well-hidden door into what Harry guessed was a storage room. "We mix the potions for a lot of our products back here, and this is where we keep most of the backstock." "It's great, Fred," Harry said truthfully. "I'm glad that you and George have opened your shop, and I'm happy you're following your dreams." Fred smiled brightly. "It's all thanks to you. The 1,000 galleons you gave to use helped us pay the down payment on this storefront and get all the ingredients we needed in order to start up the stock for the store. Which reminds me, I've got that back for you now." He said it with so much pride that Harry can't help but to grin back. "You don't need to give it back, Fred. It was a gift. My dad would have helped you out, and friends don't need repayment." Fred smiled softly. "I know. Thank you." Neville felt like he was intruding, and was inching towards the doors when Fred spoke again. Either way, we'd like you to stay a silent partner. If you'd like. And if we can borrow Sirius and Remus occasionally. They all laughed at that. But, that's not why I called you back here, Fred said. George and I have been trying to make products we think might help with the war. It was coming, they all knew. He starts pulling boxes from Organize's shelves and placing them on a workbench. This is a voice-changing potion. These are cloaks that protect from minor hexes. And this is a caterwauling stone. There were a dozen other boxes of other products that the twins had perfected. Like the charm? Neville asked. Just like, Fred said, but it's just a plain rock, and if you line them outside of your house it will trigger the alert that someone is trespassing. We think it would be better insurance, since caterwauling charms can be dismantled, but since there are multiple rocks it would be harder for the Death Eaters to get past wards unnoticed. Anyway, we want you to have a few of these things. A few fake wands and the like, just in case. Sounds like a good idea to me, Harry said. Thanks. How much do I owe you? Fred frowned. Nothing, mate. You shop here free for life. Harry didn't like it but didn't want to offend, so he agreed and then added with a laugh, don't tell Daphne. Who knows how many pygmy puffs she may want. Fred grimaced. We can barely keep up with them. They're a big seller, you know. Almost all the girls who've come in have bought one, and sometimes even 2 or 3. We can't breed them as fast as we can sell them. Harry nodded. Daphne showed Marcella the picture in which Weekly and she and Ada are desperate for puffs of their own. They begged us to buy them one when they heard we were coming today. Marcella? Ada? Fred questioned. Ada and Marcella are Daphne and Astoria's younger sisters. Ah, Fred said. I see. Well, just let George know and he will put aside 2 more pygmy puffs. Thanks, mate, Harry said, for the puffs and for this. I appreciate it. When they left the stockroom, Harry set his gaze on Daphne, who was standing next to Hermione with annoyance on her face. She had her new pygmy puff on her shoulder and a few small things in her hands, but she was glaring past Hermione, who was looking at a display of love potions. Harry laughed inwardly at this, because his friend was always complaining about being accused of using love potions. Yet, here she was looking at them in public. What are you looking at so angrily? Harry asked curiously. Did something happen? Daphne turned towards him and away from Hermione, who had abandoned the love potions to look at a box of self-inking quills. Look at Cormac McLaggen. Neville pulled a face and Harry made one in synchrony. Was he bothering you? Not me, Daphne specified, but he keeps staring at Hermione. He likes her, Neville supplied. He was barking up her tree for half of last year. Subtly, but doing it nonetheless. How had Harry missed this? She's got Remus, anyway, Harry said. Just ignore him and he'll go away. Neville and Daphne looked unconvinced, but they gathered their purchases in Hermione and continued on with their shopping. They were finally leave Flourish and Blots when Harry spotted a familiar head of white blonde hair. Is that, began Daphne. Malfoy, Harry grumbled. What's he doing? Hermione must have figured out what Harry was thinking and said, Harry, we can't leave Tonks. She told us not to. It's dangerous. We won't be long. Let's just follow him, Harry reasoned. He looks shady, and he looks like he doesn't want to be followed. Daphne hesitated but then said, it is odd, Hermione. He's been Mia all summer. The Malfoys didn't have their summer festival, and Tracy told us that he hasn't been to visit any of his friends. So why's he leaving the manor now? I agree, Neville said. Let's just see what he's up to. If it's nothing, we'll come back. If it's something, then we were right to follow. We won't all fit under the cloak, Harry pointed out. 2 barely fit under it. Daphne is more likely to understand some of it, Neville reasoned, and Hermione too. How about I stay here and tell Tonks and the 3 of you squeeze? Hermione was outnumbered and resigned herself to following the group snuck behind Draco Malfoy. When he took a turn into Borgin and Burke's, Harry gave Hermione a pointed look. No one who isn't up to something goes in there. Shush, Daphne hissed. I can't hear. Harry pulled something small from his pocket, from Fred and George. An extendable ear. Unfortunately, half the conversation is done by the time they can all hear what is being said. You said it would be ready last week, the blonde Ponce sneered, and I've got places to be soon. We just want to make sure it's safe to handle, Burke said, and then you can take it. Fine, Draco spat as he dropped 200 galleons on the counter. Send it to the manor. That's a lot of money, Daphne whispered. For what? He was eyeing a necklace earlier, but it's still on display. He isn't saying, Harry said, but maybe Burke would tell you? What? Why? Daphne hissed. Nobody knows about our engagement yet, Harry pointed out, and your family was neutral in the last war. Maybe Burke would tell you if he thinks he might curry favor. That's an awful idea, Hermione snapped, and it's a dangerous one at that. What if Malfoy sees you? Daphne frowned before hesitantly agreeing with Harry. It might be the only chance we have. I'll wait until he's gone, then I'll walk in and see if I can't find out anything else. When Malfoy had stalked out of the shop and left towards the flow point, Daphne jumped out from under the cloak and smoothed her skirt out before walking into the store confidently. I have to play this right. She made a show of looking at each piece thoroughly. She needed Burke to volunteer to help her, rather than to come in with questions. It would look suspicious. Are you looking for something, girlie? Burke barked out. A necklace, Daphne said demurely, something that can accentuate the décolletage. She points towards a blue and silver necklace. I think this one would bring out the violet in my eyes, don't you, Mr. Burke? She batted her lashes to show off her eyes, and Burke is stunned a little by the buxom villa in front of him before snapping out of it. That piece is sold, he ground out, but we've got a few pieces in the back. Bingo. Daphne frowned prettily. Are there any other items that are sold? I would rather not waste my time desiring an item that's spoken for. Burke blinked. Aye, there are. But it ain't any business of yours, girlie. Out of my shop before you scar that pretty face of yours. Daphne narrowed her eyes, flipped her hair, flounced out of the store, making sure to slam the door unnecessarily hard. As she walks by where she knows Harry and Hermione are hidden, she mutters, let's go. She hadn't gotten that much information, but it was enough to be concerned. Based on his pathological hatred for Draco Malfoy, Daphne should have expected the raging that continued for hours later. He's bought something. I know it, and he's going to find a way to kill me with it, just wait and see. Daphne would have rolled her eyes had it been anyone else, but it wasn't a totally unfair belief. Malfoy was most certainly up to something, and when they met up with Neville it had only gotten worse. He was being fitted for robes, Neville explained, with his mum, and he jumped when Madame Malkin was fitting his left arm. She hadn't even poked him with her needle. I know, because she didn't even have a pin in her hand. Then they both stormed off. Harry took this as even more vindication, so much so that days later, when they were finally arriving at platform 9 3/4 to their families, he was still raving about it. You can't just follow him around, Remus said. If he catches you, you'll have nothing more to go on. Why don't you watch him on the map? Sirius suggested. If you figure out where he spends his time, you might figure out what he's up to. Daphne wanted to throttle them both for encouraging Harry's hate for Malfoy, but instead she spent the time kissing Marcella, Ada and her parents goodbye instead. They finally got onto the train and found Hermione already seated in a compartment with Crookshanks, and the newest edition of Hogwarts, A History. Astoria had ran off to meet with her friends, and Tracy Davis was nowhere to be seen. Anaxia trotted into the cabin, and before they had even sat down, the door opened again to reveal Neville and Luna Lovegood. Daphne and Hermione excused themselves, and Neville turned to Harry. Where are they going off to? The train hasn't even left the station yet. Hermione looks like she's got spazzard flumes around her. Neville nodded sagely, and Harry looked confused, mouthing to him, spazzard flumes? Neville just shrugged and smiled slightly. A short while later, Hermione and Daphne came back, and Harry was suspicious. Hermione's face was red and puffy, and Daphne looked frighteningly upset. When he tried to ask her about it, Daphne only responded that she would tell him later. Hermione left to go to her prefect meeting, and then the cabin got an unexpected visitor. The door slid open to reveal Romilda Vane. She smiled at Harry and ignored everyone else in the compartment. Hello, Harry. Would you like to come sit with me and my friends in our compartment? Daphne glared at the girl, and Harry suddenly remembered the similar situation he had been in last year. Cho Chang had walked by their apartment, and Harry had been ashamed of Neville and Luna. He wasn't anymore. They were both true friends, and Harry was done shoving aside good people for those he wanted to impress. He was brought back to memories of all the times Ron had degraded Hermione, and he felt ashamed. He'd never said anything in deference to his first friend. No more. I'm sitting with my friends, actually, thanks, though. Daphne was silently fuming and only stayed silent because Harry had handled the situation. It wouldn't help her to lose her temper, so she rolled her eyes and just glared daggers as the girl fumbled the door closed with her giggling friends. As soon as she was gone, a second year stumbled into the cabin looking terrified. Professor Slughorn sent me to give these to you and that you should go to his compartment immediately." She shoved the notes in Harry and Neville's hands. "What's this for?" Neville asked as the girl scurried down the hall. "My father told us that Slughorn likes to play favorites," Daphne said, "and he sort of collects students he thinks will be successful. It keeps him well connected." "He likes luxury," Harry said. "Dumbledore said keeping these relationships gives him that." "So what am I being invited for? I've barely got any magic at all," Neville explained. Daphne kicked him hard in the shin. "Shut up, Neville. That isn't true and you know it. You just needed a better wand, and now you've got one." Daphne crossed her legs. "Well, go on, boys. Luna and I will stay here, won't we, Luna?" Luna nodded and Daphne gave her a bright smile. The two were chatting by the time that Harry and Neville were out the door. That's when they ran straight into the one person Harry had no desire to see. Ron Weasley. Thanks for watching.